you guys. Today we're going to talk about parallelograms. Parallelograms are actually a branch of the quadrilateral family tree. This is part A of what will be a multi-part lesson. What a parallelogram is a quadrilateral, but it has two pair of parallel sides. Now remember, parallel lines are lines that never cross, right? They run side by side. So if we look here, opposite sides of the parallelogram are parallel to each other. So AB is parallel to DC. And AD is parallel to BC. Okay? And remember, when you have parallel lines, you have alternate interior angles. And guess what? We're going to have stuff to do with that. All right, so we got 3 theorems that we need to look at for parallelograms for today's lesson. The first one says opposite angles of a parallelogram are congruent. So what that means is when I go back up here is that angle D is the same as angle B. Those two angles are congruent. And angle A is congruent to angle C. So if you have a parallelogram, then opposite angles are congruent. They are the same measure. They are equal. All right? The next one says opposite sides of a parallelogram are congruent. So that means that AB is congruent to DC and AD is congruent to BC. So opposite sides are congruent. They are equal. This length is equal to this length. This length is equal to this length. All right, and then the last one for today, the last theorem that is consecutive angles. So remember, consecutive means in a row. Consecutive angles are supplementary. Well, who remembers what supplementary means? That means they add up to 180. So add up to 180 degrees. So what that means, back up here, is that the measure of angle A plus the measure of angle B equals 180 degrees. And the measure of angle B plus the measure of angle C equals 180 degrees. These are consecutive angles. These are consecutive angles. Guess what? The measure of angle C plus the measure of angle D equals 180. And the measure of angle D plus the measure of angle A equals 180. So any two angles in a row are supplementary, which means if I add up their measures, they equal 180 degrees. So I'm going to go through these one more time. Opposite angles of a parallelogram are congruent. They're equal. Opposite sides, these edges here, of a parallelogram are congruent. They're equal. And then any two angles that are consecutive or in a row in a parallelogram add up to 180 degrees. That's the measure of the angle inside adds up to 180 degrees. Let's do some examples. All right, so let's look at this first one. It says that this is a parallelogram. I either need to see that the sides are parallel, or I need to see the word parallelogram, or it needs to be in the directions that it's a parallelogram, okay? They give us the angle S is 60 degrees, and that QR, the length from here to here, is 20, and the length from here to here, PR, is 15 units. So let's see if we can answer these questions. It says SQ equals. So here's SQ right here. What do you think SQ equals? Well, I know this is a parallelogram, and I know opposite sides are congruent. So if this side's 15, guess what? Boom, that side's 15 too. All right, the next one is asking me for SP. So here is SP right here. Again, this is a parallelogram, so I know opposite sides are congruent. So the side opposite of SP is QR, and QR is 20. So that means SP would also be 20. All right, the next one wants the measure of angle R. Now, angle S and angle R are opposite angles. They're directly across from each other. See? And I know because this is a parallelogram that opposite angles are congruent. The angles that I would connect with a diagonal. So that means the measure of angle R is also got to be 60 degrees. Now, how could we find the measure of angle Q? Any two angles that are consecutive or side by side have to add up to 180, right? So all I need to do to find the measure of angle 2 is do 180 degrees minus 60 degrees, and I get 120 degrees. These two angles have to add up to 180. These two angles have to add up to 180. Guess what? These two angles have to add up to 180. And these opposite angles are congruent. So if this is 120 degrees, this one's got to be 120 degrees. Because opposite angles are congruent. Opposite sides are congruent. Let's look at another one. All right. Who brought the variables? So what we got to do for this one is first wants us to find what x is. So what I'm going to do is use the fact that opposite angles are congruent. So I'm going to set 5x plus 15 equal to 110 degrees. Whatever these two measures are, well, I actually know what these measures are. They have to be equal because this is a parallelogram. So to find x, I have to set this equal to 110 degrees. And then you just solve it. Old school, subtract 15 to get rid of the plus 15. So we get 5x equals 110 minus 15 is 95. Divide by 5. And we get x equals, let's see, 5 will go into 9 one time, and that'll leave 45. 5 goes into 45 9 times. So x equals 19. So how can we find the measure of angle K? Well, I know this is a parallelogram. And in a parallelogram, any two angles that are consecutive have to add up to 180. So to find the measure of angle K, I just need to take 180 degrees and subtract 110 degrees. And I get 70 degrees. So if K is 70 degrees, what other angle would be 70 degrees? Angle M. Because they're opposite angles, and opposite angles are congruent. All right, for the next one, it wants me to find the length of JK. Here is JK. Well, how long is this side? Well, I go across to the opposite side, and it must be 17 because opposite sides of a parallelogram are congruent. And then it also asks for MJ. MJ will be the same length as the side opposite that side, so it must be 19. See how easy this is? You can totally do this and make 100. Okay? All right, let's just do a couple more examples. All right, for number 3. All right, what does this little thing here mean? That angle is what kind of special angle? It is a right angle, and I know that all right angles measure 90 degrees. So if this measures 90 degrees and these two have to add up to 180, what kind of angle does that have to be? Well, that's pretty much got to be a right angle too, correct? Because 90 plus 90 is 180. So to find x, I'm going to say 3x minus 9 equals 90. Again, because if this is a 90-degree angle and these two are supplementary, they have to add up to 180. 90 plus what is 180 degrees? 90. So I'll add 9 to both sides to solve the equation. And we get 3x equals 99 The undo multiplication, we divide. And x is 33. So we established that if this is a 90-degree angle, then this is a 90-degree angle. So what does that mean about all the angles in this parallelogram? What must they all be? That means they've all got to be right angles, right? So if you have a parallelogram and one angle is a right angle, then all 4 angles are a right angle. So the measure of angle V would be 90 degrees. And the measure of angle E would be 90 degrees. All right, they want me to find the length of OV. Here is OV. The side opposite OV is 22. So OV must also be 22. Then it asks for the length of the side LO. Here's LO. It is opposite EV, which is 14. So that means LO must also be 14. And one more example. All right. So this must be parallelogram WXYZ. Sorry about that. So the first thing it wants me to do is find x. And this time, instead of being part of an angle measure, x is part of one of the side lengths. But don't stress. It is still easy. So here's my x right here. All right? It's part of xy. This is the length of the segment xy. Well, since this is a parallelogram, I know that the length of this segment is the same as the length of the segment opposite that side. So I know it's got to be the same as WZ. So all you need to do is find x. To find x is say 3x minus 9 equals 15. And then to undo subtraction, we add. 15 plus 9 is 24. To undo multiplication, we divide. And we get x equals 8. Boom shakalaka. All right, the next thing it asks me for is the length of ZY or YZ. Well, this side is opposite WX, and I know opposite sides of a parallelogram are congruent, so YZ must also be 17. All right, for the next part, it wants the measure of angle W. So here's angle W. I have angle X, which is 75 degrees. And I know that these two angles have to do what together? They're consecutive angles inside a parallelogram, so they must add up to 180 degrees. So to find W, I'm just going to do 180 degrees minus 75 degrees, and we get 105 degrees. So let's go ahead, since I know W is 105 degrees, just go straight across to that opposite angle. That means angle Y has to also be 105 degrees because opposite angles in a parallelogram are congruent. They're equal. And then the last part, it wants me to find the measure of angle Z. Z is opposite angle X, so if X is 75, guess what? That means Z also has to be 75 degrees. All right, so just to sum it up, when you have a parallelogram, which is a quadrilateral with two pairs of parallel sides, then opposite angles are congruent, opposite sides are congruent, and consecutive angles add up to 180. All right, have a wonderful day, and I will talk to you later.